December 1942. The Allies are fighting through Tunisia. In the USSR, the Soviets have surrounded the Sixth Army at Stalingrad and are launching new offensives against the Axis forces. On Guadalcanal, the Americans have run into the toughest Japanese defenses yet. With all this going on, how do the great warlords of this war mark the festive season? Well, the Western festive season. Do they sit back and relax with their families, sipping champagne and eating turkey, or are they poring over maps and charts? Let's find out. I'm Indy Neidell. Welcome to a World War II special episode, taking a look at how some wartime leaders spent their Christmases in 1942. We'll start with those Allied buddies, Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt, for whom we have the most comprehensive records. Churchill's engagement diaries show that December is just as packed as any month for the Prime Minister. He spends the first couple of weeks undertaking his regular duties: cabinet meetings, appearances in the House of Commons, ministerial dinners, and appointments with British and American military officials. It's not all toil and sweat, though. Being Prime Minister also means spending time with some big-name people. On the 9th, he meets the exiled King Peter II and Queen Marie of Yugoslavia. Churchill is pretty good friends with Peter, and the king presents him with a silver cigar case engraved with a map of London and the Houses of Parliament. If anyone is wondering what to ever get me as a present, I too would like a silver cigar case engraved with a map of London. An inscription on the one given, referring perhaps to the city and Churchill, reads, "The heart of an empire." On the 15th, things slow down a bit, but not by much. The Prime Minister makes an appearance in the Commons on December 15th, taking questions about the Churchill tank. The House rises for Christmas recess 2 days later. Churchill has a cabinet meeting on the 21st, lunch with the King on the 22nd, and another cabinet meeting on the 23rd. His final duties for the year are meetings with the Chancellor, Foreign Secretary, and the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, Alan Brooke. So, being Prime Minister is an exhausting job. But there are some perks. On the 23rd, he receives his Christmas gift from George Marshall, U.S. Army Chief of Staff. These two have had their ups and downs, but Christmas is a time for putting disagreements aside, or so they say. Churchill has always been fascinated by maps, and Marshall picks the perfect gift. It's a mighty globe, weighing in at 340 kilos and with a diameter of 127 centimeters. With its mount, it stands almost as tall as Churchill himself. It's taken a pretty precarious journey to get to him, by airplane from Maine to South America, St. Helena, Ghana, Gibraltar, and finally the UK. Churchill telegrams Marshall, "It will be a fine addition to number 10 Downing Street." He finally gets a chance to relax on Christmas Day itself. He retreats to Chequers, the 16th century estate in Buckinghamshire, which has served as the country home of prime ministers since 1921. Here he is joined by his wife Clementine, his brother John, his 3 daughters, his daughter-in-law Pamela, and grandson Baby Winston. His son Randolph is with the Allied forces in North Africa. Churchill's private secretary, Elizabeth Nell, writes in her diary that the Prime Minister is in a very good mood on Christmas Day. He spends most of it sat up in bed reading a book and looking like a benevolent old cherub. That's a great description. Think of Winston Churchill as a benevolent old cherub. Well, while at Chequers, he exchanges telegrams with the Roosevelts. Churchill sends FDR his heartfelt wishes to you and all around you. The president and his wife respond in kind, remarking that the old teamwork is grand. And speaking of FDR, this is now his second wartime Christmas, as opposed to the fourth for Churchill, although only the third as Prime Minister. On the evening of the 18th, Roosevelt travels home from the White House by train. And where is home for the Roosevelts? Well, that would be the Springwood Estate in Hyde Park, New York. It's in this house that the president was born in 1882. His schedule is light for the next few days, with no official engagements other than a few visits by house guests. On the evening of the 23rd, it's back to the White House, where the president welcomes foreign policy advisor Harry Hopkins and his wife Louise for dinner. The The families have been close ever since the two men worked together while FDR was governor of New York in the early 1930s. The festivities really kick off on Christmas Eve, and the president has a hectic day. He meets Secretary of State Cordell Hull just before having lunch with Marshall and Hopkins. The afternoon is spent at the annual Christmas party for White House staff and families. He then heads to the South Portico at 4 p.m. for the tree lighting ceremony, except that this year, security and power concerns mean there won't be any lights. Instead, the tree has been adorned with ornaments old and new, collected by Washington, D.C.'s school children. Boy and Girl Scouts perform carols alongside musicians from the armed forces, and there is a B-17 flyover. The president then delivers his Christmas Eve address to the nation, paying tribute to those working in industry and serving in uniform. As always, with an FDR public appearance, he takes the usual steps to hide the effect of his disability, gripping the lectern tightly, allowing him to support his body weight with his arms. Photographers also refrain from taking any compromising images. On Christmas Day itself, the Roosevelts and the Hopkinses make the short drive to the Church of the Epiphany, less than a mile from the White House. Several thousand onlookers line the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of the president. After the service, FDR poses for photos with the pastor before returning to the White House for Christmas lunch. There are no records of the guest list, but we can assume the Hopkins family is there. Other guests we do know are there include Crown Princess Martha of Norway and her 3 children, who have been in exile in the States since 1941 and are close to the first family. There are records of the menu, though. The guests tuck into roast turkey with chestnut dressing, cranberry jelly, pork sausages, sweet potato casserole. Plum pudding is served for dessert, followed by coffee. The evening is rounded off with films in the newly completed West Wing Theater. Franklin and Eleanor stay up till 12:45 a.m. with their guests. While Roosevelt and Churchill enjoy the lap of luxury, Adolf Hitler spends the festive season in a concrete bunker in the forest. Although, for him, that is pretty much the norm. That bunker is part of the Wolfschanze, or Wolf's Lair, 5 miles from the East Prussian town of Rastenburg. He and his entourage moved into the site on June 24, 1941, 2 days after the launch of Operation Barbarossa. Hitler spends the majority of his time here, with short breaks in Berlin or at Berchtesgaden, Bavaria. From this 2.5 square mile complex, the Fuhrer oversees the war in the East, which isn't going too well for him at the moment. The Italians might want a separate peace with the USSR. He fears their commitment to the war is wavering. On the 18th, Italian Foreign Minister Count Ciano arrives at the Wolf's Lair for 3 days of talks. Ciano is horrified at the sadness of that damp forest and the boredom of collective living in the command barracks. Neither side gets what they want. Hitler refuses to consider a separate peace, and Ciano refuses to move to a total war footing and divert resources for domestic consumption to the North African War. In the immediate days leading up to Christmas, Hitler finally seals the fate of Field Marshal, no, he's still General, Friedrich Paulus and his Sixth Army at Stalingrad. Hermann Hoth's attempt to relieve the beleaguered force with his 4th Panzer Army grinds to a halt on the 19th. On the evening of the 21st, Hitler categorically rejects any possibility that the Sixth Army should be allowed to attempt a breakout of its own. Paulus and his men are doomed. The austere surroundings of the Wolf's Lair are not really ideal for a Christmas celebration, but that probably doesn't matter much to Hitler because he isn't a fan of Christmas or Christian celebrations. We can't be sure how he spends the 24th and 25th themselves, though, other than that it is in private, perhaps with his inner staff. Unlike FDR, the teetotal and vegetarian Hitler likely does not serve up any turkey or cocktails. He leaves the public-facing elements of Christmas to others, chiefly Joseph Goebbels, who addresses the German people on Christmas Eve. German radio also broadcasts an astounding technical achievement. A radio link has been established between the Sixth Army in Stalingrad and other groups of men deployed all over Europe and North Africa. The radio broadcasts all these comrades separated by thousands of miles of land and sea, singing Silent Night in unison and with families at home. is almost too good to be true. And that's because it is too good to be true. There is no link, there is no singing, it's all pre-recorded and faked. On Christmas Day, almost 1,300 men die at Stalingrad. Over in the East, Joseph Stalin will be feeling more cheerful than Hitler. Stalingrad is encircled, and Operation Little Saturn, launched the week before, has smashed its way through the Italian Eighth Army along the Don. His recent success is recognized by his Western allies. For Stalin's 63rd birthday, December 18th, he receives a telegram from Churchill. After extending birthday wishes, Churchill notes, "We are watching with admiration the magnificent offensives being carried out by the Red Army." Still, despite the good mood, he's probably also not too bothered about Christmas itself. The Soviet Union has an odd relationship with Christmas. This actually began under the Tsar during the First World War. Christmas trees were declared an unpatriotic German tradition, and the Orthodox Church banned them. The Soviet government went further, and in 1930, all religious and secular holidays were eliminated. So December 24th and 25th passed without celebration. But that's not quite the full story. Christmas is canceled, but since 1935, people in the Soviet Union have been encouraged to decorate a fir tree for New Year's celebrations. This all began with a short 8-sentence-long article in Pravda which authorized the change. So now New Year's is effectively Christmas. Although the celebrations of 1942 are naturally far more modest than those of peacetime, New Year's fir trees are decorated across the Union, and Father Frost presents gifts, and families eat and drink together. Anyway, Stalin, like Hitler, stays out of the limelight during the Soviet festivities. He delegates the task of addressing the nation on New Year's Eve to Mikhail Kalinin, chairman of the Presidium of the Soviet Union, who has performed this duty since 1935. And that is Christmas 1942. For some, a moment to escape the drudgery of war. For others, an unimportant occasion to be treated as another day. It's the fourth Christmas that the Western world has spent in the grip of war. But perhaps it is also one closer to the end. I'll leave you with some words from FDR's Christmas Eve address. "I cannot say Merry Christmas, for I think constantly of those thousands of soldiers and sailors who are in actual combat throughout the world. But I can express to you my thought that this is a happier Christmas than last year, in the sense that the forces of darkness stand against us with less confidence in the success of their evil ways." If you want to look back at how this war, soon entering its fourth year, began in the first place, you can check out our Between Two Wars Season 1 episode, which covers that as the finale to that particular series. You can check that out right here. And to get more content like this and like that, join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com, because that is what finances all of it. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.